I have two S24 Ultras. Finally, my S24 Ultra received the oneui 6.1.1 update. The other one I've left on the older 6.1 firmware. Let's dive in and compare the differences between these two firmwares. Let's go. So there are three areas I wanted to see the difference between these two phones: Galaxy AI, camera, and performance. The Galaxy AI functions have been completely overhauled. The first thing I did was remove it out of the advanced features menu, and no longer do they call it advanced intelligence. It's now called Galaxy AI, and it has its own menu option. They've also rebranded and renamed some of the functions too. Things like Samsung Notes is now called Notes Assist, and Samsung Internet is now called Browse Assist. At least it describes what they do rather than just the app that they work in. The first big difference here is to do with AI photo editing. Samsung have kind of sped up and reduced the steps to the process. First thing I noticed was that the toolbar down the bottom now has the Galaxy AI icon when you're in a photo, as opposed to needing to go into the edit function and then into the generative edit button that sits inside there. Already a step has been removed. The process of saving a generative edit is a lot quicker as well. Before, you used to have to hit done and then go save as copy, whereas now they've brought that save as copy function to replace the done button. Sounds funny, the done button. And it just immediately saves it as a copy and you're done, as opposed to hitting done and then needing to save it as a copy. You can see the extra steps are unnecessary. Thing is too, once you've saved an AI generated photo, the little icon down the bottom is also different. It no longer just has the stars, it now says AI generated content. I think that's a good step just to really make it known that this is an AI photo, not an original. The new UI of this generative edit function now has the extra AI functions. It's got sketch to image, which I'm finding a lot of fun to use because you simply just draw using the S Pen on the photo like a bird on your shoulder. And when you hit generate, it obviously goes through all the processing steps and then gives you 4 different options of birds on your shoulder. And the best part about this sketch to image is it's all real. It's not fake watercolors or to cartoons. That's a real bird that's sitting on my shoulder. And that's really cool. The old one, of course, doesn't have that. And then the other one that's in there too is Portrait Studio, where if you have a selfie of yourself or, a photo of someone's face, you can turn that into a cartoon, you can turn that into a comic book character, watercolor, etc. You just hit Portrait Studio when it's on the face, and then you go into the options and hit generate. And again, gives you 4 different options. And I like too that you can just download the individual ones that you want, as opposed to needing to just save one. That's also really good. This Portrait Studio can also now be accessed via the new contact profile card that you can create from the phone app. When you're in your profile card, you can add a photo as your card, and then Portrait Studio appears as an option here as well. And it works exactly the same as it does in Gallery. So you can go in here and create a Portrait Studio card for your contact card. Say card more. And sketch to image can also be accessed from a few different areas as well, although it functions a little bit different than it does in the Gallery. You've got it inside Samsung Notes, where if you have a drawing that you've made inside Samsung Notes, you can circle it and turn it into AI generated content, same way as you can if you just use the new sketch to image app that you find in the Edge panel. Drag out from the side, hit sketch to image, and away you go. As you can see, this photo of a nice house that I've drawn. It also works inside Smart Select, and Smart Select has been completely overhauled. It no longer is a dedicated Edge panel where you swipe in from the side and it has its own little panel there with a few different options. It's now just its own dedicated app that sits inside the Apps Edge panel. It's also in the Air Command menu too, which just quickly has got a visual redesign. It's a bit sleeker, a bit more slimline versus what it was before. The Smart Select function's completely different now. It still has the basic concept of clipping a part of the screen and saving it as a screenshot, but you no longer get sort of the extra steps and options that you were able to get before, things like GIF creation, although I did hear that is coming back. Saw that somewhere on X/Twitter. Now though, it just comes up with this glow effect. You tap on the area of the screen or you circle the area of the screen that you want, and then it gives you some options. And it's a bit contextualized, so depending on what it is that's on the screen, you can either add it to note or you can either do sketch to image, and that's sort of your new way of doing it as opposed to the way it was before. Depending on whether you like it, you'll have to test it out for yourself. I preferred the old way. that's just me. So I hope Samsung can find some sort of middle ground for One UI 7. Samsung Notes is the next area I want to touch on because that's got some new stuff and new features too. The existing functions that were there have also been upgraded and got some nice sort of UI and user experience upgrades, which I really appreciate. Before, with either Samsung Notes summaries or Notes auto format, it kind of was a bit, I guess, difficult because you had to pre-select it or it pre-selected for you, and then just all of a sudden started doing it even if you weren't ready for it. Whereas this new way, once you select the auto format or summaries, it will pre-select, but then come up with a new menu option down the bottom corner, whether you want to extend it through to that page or go all the way to the end of the document as far as it can go. Editing Daniel here, just to sort of also highlight the fact that if you swipe down from the summary, it actually condenses it down into like a little card down the bottom, whereas the old software didn't do that. You could swipe, even though there's like a little tab there, it didn't do anything. So I just thought I'd add that in because I forgot to say it when doing the A-roll. On with the video. That is good, especially with auto format, because auto format used to have a limit and you didn't know what that limit was. Now it can take you to the limit itself, but it also does seem like that limit has been extended. Samsung have extended how many words it can actually process for auto formatting, as you can see here. But it's just going to make things like summaries a whole lot smoother and yeah, makes it a lot easier to use. Reduces the steps. There's a couple of new functions that's part of Samsung Notes. The first is you can now summarize PDF documents. So if there's a PDF document loaded into Samsung Notes, it can just read that text and summarize it for you. Perfect. If you've got contracts, if you've got uni assignments that are PDF documents, it can read it and then you can summarize it. I think that's going to come in a lot of handy. The other one that's new with Samsung Notes is the ability to do audio notes and transcribe them. So before, you used to only do this in Voice Recorder, which we'll touch on in a moment, but now you can do it inside Samsung Notes as well. Not only can you transcribe, but you can also summarize the voice note that you've made. If you want to know completely how to use Samsung Notes and that voice note function, you can head up here because I've made a whole video on how to use Samsung Notes. This is a new feature though that's been added in. Some smaller ones that have been put in is there's a new message composer inside Samsung Keyboard. So if you go into the keyboard into typing a message, with the Galaxy AI button that you can press, there's an extra option in there, the Composer. Composer, you give it a prompt, you select the style of content that you like, write your prompt in, hit generate, and it spits out something. Really handy. And what's really nice about it too is if you go into different apps, it'll change the context of it. So it'll automatically pre-select email if you go into email. Really clever. Samsung updated their instant slow-mo in the gallery. When you held down on a video, it would sort of slow down that part of the clip. What's really nice now is if you remove your finger and stop instant slow-mo, it actually gives you a little button to save that section as a dedicated slow-mo clip. So rather than needing to go into edit and then find the slowing down function in the video editor, it just clips it for you straight away. That's really clever. And I think for me, I film my son playing football a lot, and I think that's going to come in real handy for a lot of different situations, especially if he's doing skills or practicing. I'm going to use this all the time. Another small one in the gallery is live effects. Basically just creating like a 3D photo, and it's just when you swipe up, it's an extra option that's in there on photos where like there's a foreground and a background. You hit it, it generates it, and then you can see what it does. This isn't anything new in the wider scope of things. It's in Google Photos for a long time. It's just now native to the gallery as well. Now we're getting into the camera. It was really interesting in the poll that I did. Camera wasn't necessarily the priority and ended up being even, so towards the end of the poll, but at the start, definitely was heavily in favor of AI and performance. But we do it anyway. From a camera software point of view, there is no feature differences. Everything is as it was. So there's no sort of nooks and crannies that I can sort of show you because it's all the same as it was before. But processing wise, that's how we can go into the detail. I went down to Burley, my favorite spot, as you all know, and sort of took photos side by side with both phones. First thing I noticed when I got it back and sort of viewed it on my Viewfinity monitor just over there was that there's some tonal differences in the sky. If you look at this first photo here in the clouds sort of on the left, in between that area, the tonal difference is very noticeable. It's not as grey, it's a bit more blue in the sky as what it was in that old firmware photo. There also seems to be more contrast in the clouds, and that was sort of a repeating theme, both the tone of the sky and the contrast in the clouds was something I noticed being a difference between a lot of different photos. It was definitely a consistent thing that I noticed across all of the 1x photos in particular that I took. To make sure it wasn't just the main camera, I actually did notice it across all of the cameras. So I took photos using the ultra wide, the 1x, 2x zoom as well, because it's part of the 1x experience, 3x, that camera is there, 5x, 10x, and across all of those, I could definitely notice that that tonal difference and that contrast existed. You let me know if you noticed it too in the comments below. I also noticed a little bit more detail in some of the photos too, like this one here of that plant thing growing off that tree. You can kind of see a bit more detail when you sort of crop in on it in that 1x shot too. Another thing I noticed too with the 1x camera in particular is it's a bit lighter on skin tones. You can see here 2 photos of my daughter, one on the old firmware, one on the new one, and her face is sort of a little bit lighter and brighter compared to the old one. I don't know which one I prefer. To be honest, she does kind of have sort of darker skin tone, but it might be a bit too dark on the one on the old firmware. So maybe it's a bit more balanced on the newer one. I sort of tried a couple of different options with different cameras. Like the 3x camera, I noticed there was a bit better detail. So the processing was adding a bit more detail back in on that 3x, especially if you look at the log here when you sort of crop in. But that sort of stuff was like, you know, processing differences, margins, really like preference things. What I really wanted to test was the zoom. Lots of people talk about and they've panned the zoom, especially beyond 10x on the S24 Ultra. At 5x, I noticed a bit of a warmer tone in some of the photos. And then also in this photo of the rocks here, you can see a little bit of a difference between the two in terms of tone and a little bit of detail as well. This photo here of, again, that same fruit thing, I noticed some less noise in the newer firmware compared to the older one. And you can see that it's a little bit more noisier in the older firmware compared to the newer one. Pushing past 5 and into that 10x, that's the next sort of step on the software, I could notice some differences too. I feel like it's ever so slightly improved in this photo here, especially if you crop in, but more especially if you sort of zoomed out. But I noticed it more here in this photo of like the bathers area at Burleigh, behind Burleigh Pavilion. You can see the text is a little bit sharper on this based on 6.1.1 update compared to what it was on the older firmware, which is good. And I think Samsung have been working on optimizing sort of text for zoom for a while now. I also noticed too that in this photo here of this building, the foreground with the trees, the green tones are a little bit sort of darker and richer compared to what they are in the older firmware. If you go into 30x on the bathers area of that photo from before, the 30x is interesting. Lots of people talk about how bad it is, but I do think Samsung have made improvements in this type of shot here with the 30x. It's definitely a bit more detail. Definitely notice a bit more, and it's not, I don't feel it's like it's as sort of painty as what it was before, watercolor or whatever they were describing it as. It definitely looks a little bit nicer. Also here, this photo of the fruit that I don't know what it is. If someone knows what it is, let me know. But you can see the tips of it are a little bit lighter. It's almost as if they're not crushing the dark areas. They're working to try to restore it in the processing. So you let me know if you think those upgrades are sort of worth talking about, but I thought it was worth making a video about it anyway, because it is quite a sizable update. When it comes to video, those tonal differences and the sky contrast differences that I highlighted before exist. When you pan through sort of the clouds in the sky, you notice it. You can see the difference in the tone of the sky and the contrast of the clouds. Seems as if Samsung have kind of swept that processing across the board. Now, the last thing to cover is performance. I find performance really, really tricky. The reason why is everyone uses their phone incredibly different. Me, for example, I'm quite a heavy phone user. Got lots of things paired to it, lots of things syncing in the background. Whereas my wife, which is the other S24 Ultra I'm comparing it against, is a much lighter phone user. More on the social media side of things, browsing Instagram, Reels, Shorts, YouTube. That's her vibe. She's not into the heavy sort of DeX usage that I might use. It's more of that lighter sort of usage. And there's less things happening in the background as far as syncing goes. So battery sort of comparisons across those two phones wouldn't really work. So I decided, even though I started, I wasn't going to put the phones through that because it's not really an honest test and it would kind of waste your time. What I could compare though was things that you can do on either phone the same. Things like video editing. So I went into Galaxy Studio and I lined up a whole bunch of videos and exported it as a movie. There was a 50 megabyte difference in the file, and that sort of showed in how long it took to export, which shows to me that it's basically the same. And then I edited a photo in Lightroom and exported it. And again, it was instantly the same speed. I also did the dreaded animation test. People like seeing these, and to be honest, all it really does is show a ceiling. To be honest, the oneui existing software was really good already. I did notice some extra bit of sharpness using 6.1.1, or at least the based on 6.1.1 versus the old one. I did notice it. You can see it yourself here, side by side, even when you slow it down a little bit. Micro improvements. A general user, like if I update my wife's phone now, she's not going to even realize it whatsoever because she uses the navigation buttons, so it wouldn't even matter to her. I also wanted to run a couple of Galaxy AI tests. I did the generative edit one that you saw sort of the tail end of before, but it was exactly the same timing, and that's server side, so I can get that. What isn't server side though is things like transcribing voice notes. So if you're in voice recorder and you've got a sort of a voice recording that you want to transcribe, that's done locally on the phone. That's not an in the cloud sort of service. Running that, whilst they sort of traded different percentage points, they pretty much did it in the exact same time. So there wasn't really any sort of performance gains from the software, from sort of everyday sort of common things. I'm going to use the phone pretty sort of heavily over the course of these next couple of days before I upload the video. But I think the battery sort of improved for me after the last update. And every time a new update lands, there's a couple of days where it doesn't do so well, and then it sort of stabilizes out. So I'll probably keep updated as I go, maybe on my Twitter, so you can come and follow me on my Twitter, and I'll sort of keep people posted on the battery and how it does. One thing I did notice, and this sort of relates to performance, ties into the camera comparison. I took sort of photos over the course of an hour at Burley, sort of in a hot day, sun was out. And what I noticed is that the old firmware S24 Ultra, the screen dimmed very quickly. I remember this being a thing with my version, with my S24 Ultra earlier in the year, that it did that every time I was doing a camera comparison. This new update didn't do it. The phone stayed max peak brightness, and it meant taking photos outdoors was actually really easy to do. The older one, you couldn't see anything. It's very, very dim. Like the less reflective display helped, but the dimmer display didn't. So it seems as if Samsung, with this update, have kind of overall improved performance across sort of minute areas. And over the course of a whole phone, that can kind of add up. So you'll notice that sometimes in day-to-day usage. It's a big update. Let me know what part of Galaxy AI you've enjoyed the most, or you're looking forward to the most when your S24 Ultra or S23 Ultra gets updated, because they will go back to that as well. Just a reminder that this update is not actually oneui 6.1.1. It is based off 6.1.1. So all the stuff from the foldable range that was on that update made its way down here. It's just Samsung can't really call it 6.1.1 because that is designed for foldables only. Hit subscribe to Tech with Benefits. Lots of stuff planned. I've got some really exciting content planned, especially coming in the next 6 weeks. Come and follow me on socials. I'll see you in the next one. You!